In 1815, during a voyage across the Mediterranean, Captain Danger's ship encounters a fierce storm and comes upon the wreck of another vessel. Edmond Dantes, the captain's assistant, spots a woman clinging to debris in the water and dives in to rescue her. He manages to save the woman, but Danglars is enraged by Dantes' disobedience and locks him in the hold, confiscating a letter carried by the rescued woman from the exiled Napoleon. Danglars later confines the woman in Dantes's cabin. The next morning, the woman attempts to retrieve the letter, but Danglars demands a large sum of money in exchange. She leaves empty-handed, vowing that her friends will take revenge. Upon arriving in Marseille, the woman finds Dantes at the port, thanks him for saving her, and reveals her name, Annelle. Later, Captain Danger and Dantes meet with ship owner Morel. Danger complains about Dantes' insubordination, stating he had forbidden any rescue efforts for the sinking vessel. However, Morel supports Dantes, insisting that ignoring people in distress would disgrace the ship's reputation. He fires Danglars and appoints Dantes as captain. Morel then introduces him to his grandson, Maximilian. Elated by his promotion, Dantes rushes to his fiancée, Mercedes de Morcerf, to share the news. Overjoyed, she sees her dreams of marriage coming true. Mercedes brings Dantes to her family estate, where his father works as a steward. The old man, overwhelmed with joy, weeps at the good news. Later, the de Morcerf family hosts a celebratory dinner. During the feast, Dantes' foster brother Fernand de Morcerf, who is also Mercedes' cousin, toasts the youngest captain in France. Mercedes pretends to be unaware of the promotion. Later, the couple takes Fernand out to sea and reveals their plans to marry. Heartbroken, Fernand, who has long harbored feelings for Mercedes, expresses doubts about her parents' approval. Mercedes, however, is confident her family will prioritize her happiness. On their wedding day, as Dantes waits in the church for his bride, she is escorted to the altar by her father. Suddenly, soldiers burst in, arresting Dantes and dragging him away. Despite the protests of everyone present, including Fernand's attempt to intervene, Dantes is brought before Gérard de Villefort, the deputy public prosecutor of Marseille. Villefort accuses him of supporting the exiled Emperor Napoleon, presenting, as evidence, a letter hidden in a Bible found on the ship. Dantes recalls the rescued woman and suspects she planted the letter in his cabin. He requests the sailor Chateau be questioned and mentions the woman's name, Annelle. Upon hearing her name, Villefort's demeanor changes drastically. Confirming that Dantes has shared this information with no one else, he orders the young man to be detained under the pretense of further investigation. Shortly afterward, Fernand visits Villefort, who is meeting with Caderousse and Danglars. Although Fernand is initially prepared to defend Dantes, Villefort shows him Napoleon's letter and points out the chance to eliminate a rival. Villefort also warns that accusations of treason could tarnish the de Morcerf family name. Reluctantly, Fernand agrees to testify against Dantes. Danglars and Caderousse silently comply, fearing the prosecutor's wrath. Meanwhile, Dantes is beaten and thrown into prison. Fernand returns to the estate and informs Mercedes that he was unable to secure her fiancé's release. That evening, Villefort's mistress, Victoria, is visited by his sister. She confronts Villefort, demanding that he release Dantes and explaining her reluctance to expose the truth about the letter's origin, threatening to expose their affair and the imminent birth of his illegitimate child, which would cause a scandal, and now confronts Villefort. In response, Villefort becomes aggressive and attacks her. Meanwhile, Edmond Dantes is imprisoned in the Chateau d'If, an isolated fortress on an island. He languishes in a damp stone cell, losing track of time as he sinks into despair, haunted by memories of Mercedes and the sunny seashore they once shared. On the verge of losing his sanity, Edmond hears a knocking sound coming from the wall. Realizing another prisoner is digging, he begins assisting from his side. Soon, he hears the voice of the other inmate, who informs him that 4 years have passed since his imprisonment, making Edmund 26 years old. Their conversation is interrupted by guards, but later Edmund enlarges the hole and slips into the neighboring cell of Abbé Faria. The men embrace, overjoyed to see another human face. Faria proposes they continue their escape efforts together, reasoning that the work will progress faster with 2 people. Edmund agrees, finding renewed purpose for the first time in years. Determined to prepare himself, he begins exercising to regain his physical strength. During breaks from their digging, he shares his story with Faria. The abbé, recognizing Edmund's lack of education, starts teaching him languages, logic, and various sciences, emphasizing that knowledge will be his greatest tool in the outside world. Over the years, a deep mentor-student bond forms between them as Faria imparts his wisdom to Edmund, helping him unravel the conspiracy that led to his imprisonment. When Edmund confesses his deepest desire is to reunite with Mercedes, Faria recounts the legend of the Knights Templar during the Crusades. The Templars amassed vast riches, but the King of France, jealous of their wealth, ordered their arrest and seized their treasures. However, the treasure was never recovered, as the Templars hid it before their persecution. Faria reveals that the last Templar, Cardinal Spada, escaped the treasure. In his final years, the Cardinal passed the secret to Faria, who now offers Edmund half of the wealth, urging him to use it wisely. The 2 men continue their escape plan, and after a decade of labor, Faria detects wet, salty soil, indicating that freedom is near. Suddenly, the tunnel collapses, trapping Faria beneath debris. Although Edmond manages to free him, the abbé succumbs to his injuries. In his dying moments, he reminds Edmond of the treasure hidden on Monte Cristo ladder. Edmond observes guards placing Faria's body in a sack. Seizing the opportunity, he switches places with the corpse. The guards, unaware of the ruse, carry the sack outside and toss it into the sea. Moments later, the warden discovers Faria's lifeless body in Edmund's cell, raising an alarm. Meanwhile, Edmund escapes by swimming to shore. Once free, Edmund makes his way to the Morcerf estate, hoping to reunite with his father. However, a servant informs him that his father died long ago, having starved himself in grief after Edmund's imprisonment. He also learns that Mercedes has married Fernand and left the estate 8 years ago, shortly after the birth of their son Albert. Devastated by the news, Edmund sails to a secluded bay, acquiring a small boat. He sets off for the island of Monte Cristo. Following the instructions left by Faria, Edmund locates the treasure hidden by the Templars. Using a concealed lever, he uncovers a secret chamber filled with unimaginable riches. The wealth transforms Edmund into one of the richest men in the world. A year later, Edmund returns to Monte Cristo. Disguised as an abb, he begins meeting with his former comrades, setting the stage for his carefully plotted revenge. The sailor Caderousse approaches the abbey and claims that Edmond Dantes died in his arms. Before passing, Dantes supposedly entrusted him with a valuable gem, asking that it be given to his trusted friends, Caderousse and Fernand, as he believed them to be honest. The abbé then reveals that Danglars was the true author of the incriminating letter. However, Caderousse confesses that it was Fernand and Danglars who betrayed Edmond out of jealousy and spite. Fernand acted out of love for Mercedes, while Danglars sought revenge for losing his chance to become captain. Caderousse admits his own role in the conspiracy, lying about overhearing Edmond's supposed support for the emperor. He reveals that the only person who remained loyal to Dantes was the shipowner, Morel. After Edmond's arrest, Morel was forced to rehire Danglars as captain. Shortly after, half of Morel's ships were allegedly seized by pirates, forcing him to sell his company to Danglars for a pittance. Miraculously, the ships returned, Once the sale was finalized, Villefort, who could have intervened, chose to remain silent, as his former mistress, Victoria, had since married Danglars. Tragically, Morel died in poverty. Caderousse further reveals his own fear of confronting powerful figures, worried he might meet the same fate as poor Annelle, who tried to save Edmond. Villefort had handed her over to the notorious Maillard brothers, who exploited her beauty for profit. Hearing all this, Edmond secures Caderousse's promise to assist him when called upon. He then goes to a church and vows before God to deliver justice to those who wronged him. That evening, Edmond visits Annelle, who is lying on her deathbed. She recognizes her savior and confesses that she once escaped, determined to take revenge on Villefort. She even traveled to Paris and found his residence. When she prepared to kill him, she saw Villefort holding a live infant, his illegitimate son with Victoria, in the garden. Annelle rescued the baby, naming him André, and placed him in an orphanage, before being recaptured by her captors. Despite her dire circumstances, she occasionally managed to visit the boy at the country after her boy's home and the garden so that she could collect data on Polabella. He promises to prepare him for vengeance against those who ruin their lives. 5 years later, in Paris, General Fernand Morcerf announces his retirement from the army to take a seat in the Chamber of Peers. Celebrated as one of France's finest soldiers, he gained fame during the defense of the Sultan of Janina's family, though he ultimately failed to save them. After the ceremony, Fernand, Mercedes, and their son Albert head home. Fernand scolds Albert for his indifference toward Eugenie Danglars. Suddenly, a thief breaks into their carriage and steals Fernand's recently awarded Legion of Honor. Albert chases the thief, but is ambushed. He is saved by the Count of Monte Cristo, who displays remarkable combat skills before disseering with his associates. Albert, impressed, loses consciousness after being struck. The next day, Albert and Fernand visit the Count to express their gratitude. The Count shows them his impressive collection of weapons and demonstrates his shooting skills at a private range. Before leaving, Fernand invites the Count and his protégé, Prince Cavalcanti, to a hunting expedition hosted by Baron Danglars. While escorting Fernand out, Albert hears singing and discovers a beautiful young woman in one of the rooms. The Count introduces her as his goddaughter, Haydée, and warns Albert not to pursue her. The Count explains that Haydée was sold to pirates after her father's death, and he rescued her, now protecting her from further emotional harm. However, the Count orchestrates a seemingly chance encounter between Haydée and Albert. Carefully rehearsing with Haydée beforehand, Albert is captivated by her beauty and grace. Observing the young man, the Count recalls how he meticulously trained André in etiquette, preparing him for high society. Later, Prince Cavalcanti is introduced during the hunting trip. Following the Count's advice, he begins courting Eugenie Danglars. The captivated Count volunteers to finish the animal, doing so while staring directly at Villefort. After the hunt, the party gathers for lunch, where André meets Juan. Fernand seizes the opportunity to introduce the Count to his wife. Monte Cristo remains composed, but Mercedes is visibly shaken, as though she recognizes her former fiancé. She attributes her unease to the excitement of meeting her son's savior. Albert notices his mother's agitation, but she reassures him. Upon returning home, Dantes recalls Mercedes and struggles to control his emotions. He rereads Fernand's denunciation letter, bitterly noting the absence of tears for him on Mercedes' face. However, Haydée promises that Mercedes will soon know sorrow. Later, the Count and Cavalcanti accept an invitation to a dinner party at Danglars' residence. During a card game, Monte Cristo casually mentions that Cavalcanti's father is unimaginably wealthy, though he wouldn't vouch for the man's honesty, especially as he plans to marry his son to the richest heiress in Paris. This revelation does not faze Danglars. At this point, Fernand remarks on rumors that the main newspaper has been purchased by a foreigner, Lord Halifax. The Count warns that Halifax uses the press to spread false news and manipulate the stock market, but his caution is dismissed. As they leave, Haydée encounters Albert, who is clearly captivated by her. Seizing the moment, the Count invites Albert to a Friday dinner at his estate. Later, Mercedes approaches the Count, attempting to apologize for her behavior, explaining that he reminded her of a long-lost friend. Her anxiety resurfaces in the carriage, though. Meanwhile, Haydée finds a note from Albert, who, despite the Count's restrictions, requests a private meeting. The next day, Albert arrives at Haydée's home. They stroll through the garden, and Albert confesses that neither he nor his mother will attend Monte Cristo's dinner. Hearing Haydée's account of their walk, the Count realizes that she has feelings for Albert, though she cannot forget what his father did to her family. The evening of Monte Cristo's grand dinner arrives, with the Danglars, Villefort, and Fernand couples among the guests. Upon entering, Victoria Danglars immediately recognizes the house as the one where she gave birth to her illegitimate son. Villefort is similarly uneasy, but hides it well. At the end of the meal, Monte Cristo shares a chilling tale of a father who buried his infant alive in the garden surrounding the estate. Villefort frowns. Victoria tries to conceal her distress, while Danglars appears genuinely curious. Their host vividly describes how, on his first night in the house, he heard screams from an upstairs room, followed by a child's voice begging to be freed. The next morning, he ordered his men to dig up the garden, uncovering a chest that he now proposes to open in front of them. Inviting the guests to follow him, he reveals the chest. Victoria and Villefort can no longer hide their fear, as Monte Cristo opens the chest only to reveal it empty. Danglars laughs at what he perceives as a clever prank, while the others breathe sighs of relief. The next day, Victoria confronts Villefort, demanding answers, but the prosecutor offers no explanation. Sensing their dark secret is in jeopardy, he resolves to learn more about the Count. However, this was precisely Monte Cristo's intention. Assuming the identity of Lord Halifax, one of his many aliases, he meets Villefort, disguised as the Englishman. He alleviates Villefort's suspicions by recounting a fabricated duel he supposedly fought with the Count years ago in India. Meanwhile, Monte Cristo leaves town, instructing his allies to continue fostering ties with Eugenie and Albert. The young couple grows closer, falling in love, as do Eugenie and André. In Marseille, the Count reminds Caderousse of his debt to their late friend. Upon returning to Paris, Monte Cristo, accompanied by Haydée, attends Eugenie's birthday celebration. While the young people step away, Mercedes invites Monte Cristo for a walk. She offers him wine and refreshments, which he refuses. Mercedes recalls an Arabic custom where sharing food signifies eternal friendship. The Count coldly retorts that, in Paris, loyalty has long since disappeared. Mercedes then asks him to share his memories. He confesses that he once deeply loved a woman who had vowed eternal fidelity, but ultimately failed to wait for him. Unexpectedly, Mercedes asks if he could ever forgive her if she sought his pardon. The Count evades the question. That same day, Halifax's newspaper reports the theft of Danglars' entire fleet, leading to a crash in his stock prices. However, Fernand, with access to military telegraphs, begins to take advantage of the situation. Learning that the news is false, Fernand rushes to reassure his friend Danglars. Sensing an opportunity for profit, Danglars decides to repurchase his shares, confident in their imminent rebound once the truth emerges. To finance this, he borrows money from the Count, using all his assets as collateral. Convinced of his impending fortune, Danglars, with Villefort's assistance, files a defamation lawsuit against Lord Halifax, holding him accountable for the false report. However, Halifax fails to appear in court. Meanwhile, Caderousse redeems himself by seizing Danglars' fleet in Marseille. During the trial, Andrea Cavalcanti appears to represent the Englishman. Andrea denies the accusations of lying against Halifax, claiming the ships were indeed stolen. He then reveals his shocking backstory. After spending years living on the streets, he was taken in by the Cavalcanti family. Only upon arriving in Paris did he uncover his true parentage. His father is an aristocrat, and his mother is his father's mistress, who believes her son to be dead. This man, he reveals, is none other than the prosecutor Villefort. Villefort vehemently denies the accusation, threatening Andrea with legal action. However, unwilling to publicly disgrace his former lover, he leaves the courtroom in silence. The judge adjourns the session, and, as the courtroom empties, Andrea confesses to his half-sister Eugenie that he had manipulated her emotions for revenge. He admits he could never love her, as they share the same mother, Victoria, now Baroness Danglars. Upon leaving the courthouse, the Count informs Danglars that his fleet has indeed vanished, and that all his wealth now belongs to Monte Cristo. The Count advises Danglars to go into exile to spare his wife and daughter from further suffering, warning that he will show no mercy. However, an unforeseen tragedy unfolds. Ignoring the Count's orders, Andrea tracks down his father and stabs him to death. In response, a soldier guarding Villefort immediately shoots and kills Andrea. Haydée weeps over Andrea's lifeless body as the Count arrives. They bury the young man, but his death drives a wedge between Haydée and Monte Cristo. Blaming him for the tragedy, she confronts him, accusing him of causing needless suffering. The Count defends his actions, claiming they were driven by justice, but Haydée refuses to listen. She writes to Albert, urging him to forget her if he truly loves her. Distraught, Albert visits the Count's residence and proposes that he and Haydée flee together. She refuses, urging him to escape alone. Albert bids her farewell, preparing to face death as he cannot imagine life without her. Moved by his despair, Haydée agrees to leave with him. As they prepare to depart, the Count intercepts them, reminding Haydée of her heritage. He reveals that she is the daughter of Ali Pasha, of Janina, betrayed and murdered by Fernand de Morcerf, who then sold her into slavery. Upon hearing this, Albert challenges the Count to a duel, realizing that his honor has been tarnished and his trust manipulated. Haydée pleads with the Count to spare Albert's life, but he coldly reminds her of Edmond Dantes' fate, asserting that innocent children often pay for the sins of their fathers. Devastated, Haydée flees in tears while the Count calmly prepares for the duel, meticulously inspecting his pistols. Suddenly, Mercedes enters, addressing him as Edmond and begging him to spare her only son. She reveals that from the moment she saw him, she recognized her long-lost fiancé. Mercedes blames herself for believing the false news of his death and succumbing to loneliness. Yet she remains bewildered by the events that unfolded. The Count then discloses Fernand's treachery, which had destroyed his life, presenting her with a confession letter signed by Fernand. Mercette Morcez reads the letter, but implores Edmond to seek vengeance only against those truly deserving of it. Touched by her plea, the Count promises that Albert will live in the hopes of being a good man. As Albert refuses to spare him, the next morning, Edmond and Albert meet at the designated location. The Count fires first, deliberately missing Albert, then takes aim but ultimately lowers his weapon. Later, the Count's carriage returns to his home, where Haidee watches as Edmund steps out alone. She shouts her hatred at him, accusing him of stealing her love and life, and vows never to forgive him or herself. Suddenly, her expression changes as she sees Albert emerge from the carriage, alive and well. They embrace as the Count gives them his blessing for a happy life. Meanwhile, Fernand watches as Mercedes boards a carriage to leave his home forever. He rushes to the Count's estate with a saber, seeking to end his rival, whom he has finally recognized. The Count meets him at the gate, also armed with a saber. He recounts how he retraced Fernand's steps, spoke with everyone he knew, and discovered that Fernand had betrayed everyone. A tense duel ensues, during which the Count is gravely wounded in the abdomen. He collapses near the house, but rises just as Fernand prepares to strike the final blow. Overpowering the general, he leaves him burdened with eternal guilt and shame for his betrayals. Later, Mercedes returns to her family's estate and visits the church where she and Edmond were to be wed. There she finds a letter hidden in the Bible, in which Edmond writes that Providence separated them, but their children will find happiness in their stead. He sets out to see where no traces of man remain until Providence reunites them. He writes that she must wait in hope. The Millions, its gripping plot, noble hero, triumph of good over evil, and ultimate justice make it a timeless classic. Since the advent of cinema, there have been at least 15 adaptations of this novel. Interestingly, reviews of the latest film highlight its faithful rendition of the classic tale.